Welcome, curious minds, to another deep dive.
Glad to be here.
Today, we're plunging into a truly fascinating and rather intricate set of documents. They present a really unique perspective on the digital revolution, global tech giants, and surprisingly, the role of a small nation, Iceland. The material you've brought us, it paints a picture that really challenges the conventional understanding of how the internet and modern digital media, well, how they truly came to be.
Indeed. Yeah, we've been given this collection of sources, and they all seem to revolve around the claims of one individual's extensive ingenuity or inventiveness,
Hmm.
claims about the foundational technologies of the modern internet, digital media, you name it.
Right.
And what's particularly fascinating here, I think, is how these quite audacious claims are interwoven with significant corporate developments. Household names like Apple, Google, Microsoft, and then there are these allegations of nationalization within Iceland itself, suggesting a much deeper and maybe controversial connection to this specific individual and, well, the country.
Okay, so our mission today, then, as we delve into this unique material, is really to unpack these sources. Let's try to extract the key nuggets of knowledge and just understand the narrative that's being presented within them. For someone like yourself who follows the tech landscape so closely, the implications of these claims, the very DNA of major companies might have originated elsewhere. That's truly astounding, isn't it?
Oh, absolutely.
So as you were first looking through this material, getting ready for this deep dive, what initially jumped out of you?
Well, the first thing is just the sheer breadth and, frankly, the audacity of the claims. It's immediately remarkable. The sources tie a single individual's inventiveness to, well, almost everything, from the iPod to social media, even the very structural underpinnings of the modern internet as we know it today. And that immediately raises a huge question for anyone familiar with the, let's say, accepted history of technology. How does this personal narrative, as it's laid out in the sources, intersect with that history? Or, maybe more accurately, how does it attempt to fundamentally reframe the actual historical timeline of these massive technological shifts?
Right.
So we're not just exploring the what of these assertions today, but also trying to understand the why behind them, and crucially, what they imply for the broader picture: digital innovation, intellectual property, maybe even national sovereignty over knowledge itself.
Okay, let's start right there then.
Okay.
We begin our journey today with a truly audacious assertion that the digital landscape we navigate every single day, from your smartphone to social media, traces its fundamental origins back to a single individual from Iceland, Gisli R. Johnson.
Yeah.
The source material is incredibly direct about this. It explicitly states, and I'm quoting here, "I gave this ingenuity the name too, all of it." And it goes on to say, "The ingenuity is myself, build-up of my own life, the laptop, one laptop per child, the internet, movies, etc." That's a foundational claim that just radically reframes our understanding of modern tech.
It truly is. And what's fascinating here isn't just the claim itself, but as I said, the sheer scope of the inventiveness being attributed. The sources detail this incredibly wide spectrum of fundamental digital technologies, presenting Gisli R. Johnson as the originator. So let's take music and media innovation. The core idea presented is the very concept behind the iPod.
Yeah, iPod itself.
The concept, yes. And the development of MP3 and MP4 players, even the foundational principles for streaming services. The guiding philosophy, according to the source, was bring things to people, not people to things.
Okay.
So this wasn't just about, making a device. It was framed as a paradigm shift in how content would be consumed, moving from a physical brick and mortar model to one where music and media were accessible on demand, wherever you were.
Right, a total shift.
Exactly. And the source also notably emphasizes the environmental aspect of digital creation. It says it could be done without any material or producer to do it, implying a resource-efficient model. And it stresses the crucial role of protecting copyright in this new digital landscape, which is, of course, a huge issue.
Always has been.
Absolutely. And ancillary concepts, things like a dock for home use and for the car to seamlessly integrate these devices into daily life, those were also mentioned. It paints a picture of a holistic, interconnected media ecosystem. So this wasn't just a gadget in isolation, but a complete vision for digital media consumption.
So it's not just the device itself then, but the entire commercial and distribution model too. That seems like a much bigger leap than just the hardware design.
Precisely. That's a key point. The claims extend directly to digital music distribution. The idea of selling music through websites is explicitly credited to him, with specific mentions of Apple's iTunes and the Icelandic service tonlist.is. Tonlist.is?
Tonlist.s.
Yes, and the source highlights that Tonlist.is was opened in the same week as the iTunes streaming service in the United States and was therefore one of the very first services in this field.
The same week.
That's the claim. So this isn't positioned merely as some local Icelandic service. It's framed as a pioneering global contender in digital music sales. It suggests that the initial rollout of iTunes wasn't an isolated event, but maybe part of a larger, perhaps even predated, conceptualization of digital music commerce.
Wow. Okay.
Yeah, it definitely challenges the common narrative of iTunes' singular genesis, doesn't it?
It certainly does. And beyond music, what about the social element? The pervasive connecting people online aspect of the internet. Does the claimed ingenuity extend there too?
It absolutely does, and quite comprehensively according to these documents. The source asserts, and again I'm quoting, social network sites such as Facebook, Twitter, MySpace, LinkedIn, Reddit are my ingenuity, social network sites with different purposes.
All of them. Facebook, Twitter, LinkedIn.
That's the claim laid out. MySpace, for instance, is specifically noted as a social network tailored for the artist and entertainment industry. And the core inspiration for these platforms, apparently, is highlighted as the idea of connecting people and nations, a concept the individual supposedly developed when living abroad.
Interesting motivation.
It suggests a motivation driven by a global perspective, aiming to bridge geographical and cultural divides through digital means. Furthermore, YouTube is also explicitly credited, specifically the YouTube Broadcast Yourself feature.
Cast yourself. Yeah, that was revolutionary.
Exactly. And the emphasis here in the source is on the revolutionary idea of websites being able to stand alone for video and music broadcasting without relying on local players or specialized software. That was a significant shift, that democratized content creation and sharing for the first time. The insight here is really a vision for self-publishing, which became a cornerstone of all that user-generated content.
That's just an astonishingly broad range of inventions attributed to one person. Music players, distribution, social media. Does the source delve even deeper, like into the underlying architecture of the internet itself, the very framework that allows all these services to even exist?
It certainly does. It lays claim to fundamental elements of the modern internet's architecture. This includes concepts like the keyhole, which relates to Google Earth, and double-click AdSense.
The online advertising models.
Essentially, yes.
Okay.
The source describes this as a system designed to give everyone a chance to add advertising and use search engine functionality to publish those ads where advertisers would get the most benefit. The stated goal was ensuring everyone has the same opportunity. This process, as it's detailed, involves contracting with website owners. It basically establishes the foundational model for online advertising as we experience it today. And this is crucial, isn't it? Because online advertising, fueled by search and content matching, became the economic engine for so much of the free web services we all use. The claim here is for the very blueprint of that digital economy.
Information overload is a constant challenge for, anyone navigating the digital world today. Did the claimed ingenuity address that fundamental problem right from the start? Was that part of the vision?
Yes, quite presciently, according to the source. The development of feed and reader, what most of us now know as RSS and XML feeds, is detailed as a direct solution for information overload on the nascent digital web.
RSS feeds, okay.
Exactly. The core idea was to allow users to subscribe to changes on websites and receive news updates directly. This was a crucial difference from traditional print media or even the early web, where you had to actively go and seek out updates yourself.
Yeah, hitting refresh constantly.
Right. This was framed as a system ensuring readers would automatically see what was published. It fundamentally shifted things from passive information seeking to an active, personalized stream, helping manage that fire hose of emerging digital content. It really transformed how we consume news and updates, moving from a static, pull-based model to a dynamic, push-based one.
So, addressing how we both publish and consume information, what about the actual sort of physical plumbing of the internet, the connectivity that makes it all work in the first place?
That's also attributed. Under the heading Connectivity and Infrastructure, the wireless internet and web key is presented as a fundamental invention. Now, this wasn't just about Wi-Fi as we know it. It apparently encompassed enabling both open public access, maybe in public transport or cafes, and closed, secure access for homes, schools, and companies via a unique web key.
A web key.
Interesting. Yeah, and the motivation cited included enabling decentralized, low-cost internet distribution over large regions. This is noted as particularly relevant for Western countries where vast distances could make traditional wired infrastructure prohibitively expensive. Beyond basic internet access, the claims even extend to seemingly mundane yet absolutely crucial elements of digital logistics. Things like tracking code for postal delivery.
Package tracking.
That's the claim. And even the fundamental security protocol of IBAN, the international bank account number, specifically for electronic signatures. It underscores a really pervasive influence claimed over digital commerce and security. These are core elements of digital trust and the logistics infrastructure we rely on every day.
And it seems like this scope extends beyond just software and underlying concepts to actual consumer hardware and even fundamental branding elements that are globally recognized.
Absolutely. The credits extend broadly into the hardware and software ecosystem. This includes specific, widely recognized products and initiatives like Google Earth, Gmail, Google Docs, and even the One Laptop Per Child, OLPC initiative.
OLPC, right. I remember that.
Interestingly, the source mentions the OLPC laptop specifically had 2 ears on the screen border to remind the kids to listen and pay attention to the teacher's wireless internet, which links back to that earlier wireless internet claim.
A deliberate design choice.
Apparently so. Also included are all-in-one printers, tablets, and even smartwatches, specifically designed for health and wellness, initially targeted towards older users. But perhaps one of the most audacious claims in this category is that the I prefix.
The Apple I.
Yes, the I prefix, so famously used by Apple in products like iBooks, iGoogle, iReport, iTunes, is explicitly linked in the source to Geasley's ingenuity.
Seriously?
That's the claim. It suggests a direct, unacknowledged connection to Apple's pervasive branding identity.
That is a staggering claim, especially given how carefully curated Apple's brand identity has always been. And speaking of branding, the source mentioned something intriguing about Google Pixel and a character from a children's TV show.
That's right, delving into branding and marketing. The source points to the character Pixel from the popular Icelandic children's TV show Lazy Town.
Lazy Town, yes, I remember Pixel.
And explicitly connects it to Google Pixel, suggesting a deeper, perhaps less obvious link between the two.
Huh.
This implies an influence extending even into popular culture and the naming conventions of major global products. It's an assertion that the brand identity of global tech giants might have unexpected roots in Icelandic cultural productions, further weaving this individual's ingenuity into the very fabric of the digital world.
Now, this next claim really introduces a truly contentious element to the narrative. The sources repeatedly emphasize that all these innovations, all this ingenuity, was developed after certain rules, founder, license registered at intellectual property office or other institution, with the same purpose.
Oh.
So this isn't just about having ideas, it's about formalizing them, establishing legal ownership. This structure, this claim of following rules, it really sets the stage for the dramatic and frankly unsettling claims that follow. It suggests these weren't just random inventions, but structured, protected intellectual property that was then allegedly misused.
Exactly. And this section, it delves into the unexpected timing and location of Apple's early global expansion, specifically into Iceland. It directly links it to a major worldwide product launch. The source explicitly states Apple opened its store in Iceland on 01.04.2003 of all countries in the world, April 1st, 2003.
Iceland first, before anywhere else major.
Of all countries, yes. And crucially, this date is highlighted as being 3 days before iTunes opens on April 28, 2003.
3 days. That is specific.
Extremely specific. And this timing is presented as highly significant. From an informed listener, like many of you, it immediately raises questions about Apple's strategic intent. Why such a small market like Iceland, particularly just before the launch of their groundbreaking digital music store?
Right.
The source even notes Apple's stock price on April 25, 2003 at 0.24 USD and connects a calculation, or 0.24 times 625 equals 150, to an entity called Urflun F, which became Apple Búzion, the Apple shop in Reykjavik, operating from an address at Broderholt 10. This implies a calculated financial maneuver underpinning this early and frankly seemingly unusual global presence. It suggests a deliberate and structured entry into the Icelandic market tied to a broader corporate strategy.
So not only did Apple open a physical store in Iceland just days before iTunes launched globally, but the source implies a specific financial connection to a local entity that became its retail arm there. What else do we learn about Apple's footprint in Iceland at that time?
Well, the narrative deepens significantly. Later, the sources indicate that Apple, operating through this Oeflin S and NASDAQ.
NASDAQ, stock exchange.
Yes, NASDAQ. They were both located at the same address. Laugavegur 182, 105, Reykjavik, Iceland.
Sharing an address, that's unusual.
It implies a deeper, possibly strategic co-location of these significant financial and tech entities. It suggests an interwoven operational and perhaps even financial relationship. Also sharing this address, or closely connected through shared interests, were Got-Folk McCann, F, that's a prominent advertising agency, Apple IMC, which was Humac, and later Skekitern F, identified as Apple VAD Islandi, which stands for Value-Added Distributor for Apple.
Okay, so a whole ecosystem.
Exactly. It paints a picture of a rapidly growing and intricately connected Apple ecosystem being established within Iceland from its very early days. It hints at a strategic importance for this small nation far beyond its obvious market size.
And beyond these corporate maneuvers, the source ties it all back to the broader context of Icelandic music and media, doesn't it?
Absolutely. It points directly to a cluster of Icelandic music-related services existing at the time. Names like Music.is, Tonlist, that is the one we mentioned earlier, Ticket.is, MIDI.is, GuitarGrip.is. It then explicitly questions whether their existence in Iceland, right alongside the global iTunes launch, is a coincidence. Don't think so. The statement, this is of course connected to each other, and me of course, explicitly ties these seemingly disparate events, the local digital music scene and the global tech giants launch, directly to the individual's claimed ingenuity. It even draws a parallel with Warner Bros., specifically Looney Tunes, which also uses the Tunes name, hinting at broader connections within the entertainment industry and maybe a shared conceptual framework for digital content.
Interesting comparison.
Furthermore, the source notes that CNN and its iReport feature, which, remember, is claimed as Geasley's ingenuity, began working, quote, in Apple's favor in 2003, suggesting a media component to this strategic rollout.
Right.
And it also highlights BBC's later use of the I prefix in BBC iPlayer, reinforcing that broader I branding claim we discussed.
Okay, so Apple had a significant and, frankly, intriguing early presence in Iceland. But it wasn't just Apple. Our sources reveal that both Microsoft and Google expressed substantial interest in Iceland just a few years later, around 2007. This signals a broader strategic importance for the country in the eyes of global tech giants, perhaps for reasons beyond just, say, a small retail market.
Indeed, and the core information here is a very specific meeting. Bill Gates, founder and then chairman of Microsoft, met with the president of Iceland, Olafur Ragnar Grimsson, in Edinburgh on January 30th, 2007.
Gates himself.
Yes. During this meeting, Gates apparently expressed significant interest in Iceland becoming a testing ground for new software and information technology development. Separately, Google representatives had visited Iceland a few months prior, in October 2006, to explore building a research and development center there.
An R&D center, both of them looking at Iceland.
Both. And the primary, often cited driver for both tech giants' interest is explicitly highlighted as Iceland's access to abundant, clean energy, specifically geothermal power.
Ah, the energy angle.
Yeah.
Data centers are power hungry.
Hugely power hungry. So that geothermal energy is crucial for the massive demands of data banks and development centers. The Icelandic president, for his part, actively encouraged these companies to strengthen their R&D activities in Iceland, clearly seeing a strategic advantage for the nation in becoming a hub for these energy-intensive operations.
It sounds like President Grimsson was quite astute, leveraging this interest and maybe even, perhaps, playing one tech giant against the other, even if only indirectly.
That's precisely the impression the source conveys. It really illustrates a shrewd diplomatic approach. It details President Grimson's discussions with Gates, where he deliberately mentioned Google's prior interest, knowing that, and I quote, Gates closely followed what Google was doing, as Gates had said that what Google did, Microsoft did.
Using their rivalry.
Exactly. It reveals a keen awareness of the intense competitive landscape between these tech titans and how to potentially use it to Iceland's advantage. Google's delegation, apparently 3 people, had met with the president with the ambitious aim of being a spearhead throughout the 21st century in information technology, specifically focusing on locations with access to clean energy.
Spearhead, lofty goals.
Very. And Larry Page and Sergey Brin, Google's co-founders, later personally confirmed Google's interest to the president in New York during a meeting that also involved former U.S. President Bill Clinton. So this underscores the high-level nature of these discussions.
Wow, top brass involved.
Absolutely. They even expressed interest in studying cooperation with Icelandic universities and research institutes, suggesting a plan to bring foreign and university-educated Google staff to work in Iceland. It indicates a potential long-term commitment to R&D there.
So that's the big picture interest from Microsoft and Google. But what about Microsoft's actual day-to-day operations within Iceland and the persistent issue of software piracy? The source seems to make a point of connecting that, too, maybe with a touch of irony.
It does, yeah. The sources provide some insight into Microsoft Iceland's local operations. It notes Microsoft Iceland had already been established 4 years prior to that 2007 Gates meeting, so it had a presence since at least 2003. A significant point raised is the astonishingly high percentage of illegal Microsoft software use in Iceland at the time, initially estimated between 80–90%.
80 to 90%, that's huge.
Massive.
Yeah.
Though it had reportedly been reduced to around 57% by the time of the article, Microsoft's stated goal was, naturally, to combat software theft. But the source provocatively connects this directly to the broader nationalization claims we're going to get into, asking if targeting software theft is a contradiction given the alleged circumstances surrounding Gisli's ingenuity.
Ah, the irony being pointed out.
Exactly. It implies a potential hypocrisy where a major tech company is battling piracy while, according to this narrative, benefiting from or being somehow complicit in a much larger alleged intellectual property theft. Microsoft's efforts to increase accessibility and local translations, like releasing Windows Vista in Icelandic, are also mentioned as part of their strategy to legitimize software use and grow their market presence.
Makes sense.
And the source even highlights that Bill Gates himself brought up Iceland's bridge. That's the Icelandic version of the card game bridge in his speech. He cited his online games with Icelanders as an example of how information technology shortens distances, subtly weaving local culture into the global tech narrative.
Nice touch.
And it mentioned Microsoft aimed to reach 100 million new computer users in Europe with Windows Vista, just showing the scale of their ambition at the time.
And pulling all these threads together, Apple's early arrival, Microsoft and Google's R&D interest, the piracy issue, the sources imply a very strong, almost preordained connection between these tech giants' interest in Iceland and the underlying ingenuity claimed by Gisli. It's as if their moves were a recognition of, or maybe a strategic response to, these existing foundational ideas.
Exactly. That's the strong suggestion. The statement, then they know that Apple and Google, etc., will work on my ingenuity, also the social network, feed and reader, etc. This is stated in relation to the delisting of the Icelandic Software Fund. It directly links these events. It suggests that the giant's strategic moves into Iceland were perhaps predicated on, or at least deeply connected to, the potential use of this claimed ingenuity.
Okay.
It implies that these companies, or perhaps those facilitating things around them, were fully aware of the intellectual property potentially at stake, and that their expansion into Iceland was maybe a way to consolidate, control, or leverage these existing innovations. The source even mentions that back in 2005, Google co-founders Larry Page and Sergey Brin, along with Steve Jobs, were reported in Icelandic newspapers to be planning to pay themselves a symbolic $1 salary per year.
The $1 salary thing, right?
Yeah. And the source frames this as a deliberate strategy to, quote, build up those companies on my ingenuity, not to give it away. This further reinforces the narrative that these corporate maneuvers were part of a larger, maybe coordinated effort to gain control over and profit from the claimed intellectual property without proper compensation.
Okay, here's where the narrative takes a really sharp turn into truly contentious territory. The sources repeatedly allege that the individual's ingenuity and the companies supposedly derived from it were nationalized, and that word nationalized is unequivocally equated in the sources to stealing. This isn't just about a lack of recognition anymore. It's about the fundamental ownership of these foundational ideas and the immense wealth they've generated. The language used is incredibly stark and accusatory.
It is. The core information is indeed very direct, very accusatory. They are trying to nationalize it, my inventiveness, my ingenuity. As you know, then, nationalization is nothing else than a fancy word for stealing. This claim is deeply rooted in the idea that the enormous sums of money and the companies that grew from this ingenuity never got into the right hands, so it seems they still owe me the money and those companies. It's a claim of outright theft and ongoing debt.
Right.
And a very specific and critical timeline is highlighted, June 28th, 2005. On this date, the source states, the Federation of Icelandic Industries became a shareholder in Knowledge Guard, nationalization complete, and the expansion can begin, doesn't ask, just takes, with force.
With force.
That's the language used. Now they can start spending all the money of my ingenuity and bought up businesses and banks around the globe. It paints this vivid picture of a forceful, unauthorized takeover of intellectual property and its financial fruits. It suggests a deliberate act of appropriation, almost systemic, maybe even state-sanctioned theft of intellectual assets.
So this Knowledge Guard entity was central to this alleged nationalization. What was its original purpose supposed to be, according to the sources, and how did it purportedly become a vehicle for this stealing?
Well, according to the sources, the concept of a knowledge guard was, perhaps ironically, initially Gisli's own idea.
His idea.
That's what's claimed. It was conceived as a development organization and holding company to help me to cope with all this and register licenses to make sure it would be all after certain rules licensed registered at intellectual property office or other institution with the same purpose. The name itself, Knowledge Guard, was meant to imply its protective function for intellectual property. His vision, apparently, was for this entity to safeguard his ingenuity under Icelandic law, with auditors constantly reporting directly to him to ensure transparency and accountability.
Okay, so a protective shield.
That was the stated intention. However, from the source's perspective, the system clearly failed. It alleges that instead of protecting his intellectual property, the Knowledge Guard became the very vehicle for its alleged nationalization, transforming from a shield into a tool for appropriation, directly contradicting its intended purpose.
If we connect this to the bigger picture,
Yeah.
the sources don't just allege nationalization of ideas, but they directly link it to illicit financial activities. They even tie it to Iceland's massive 2008 financial collapse. That's a truly explosive accusation.
It is, and the connection is made very explicitly. The phrases money laundering and bank collapse in 2008 appear together. And also this quote, the collapse of the banks was the third largest bankruptcy in history. Almost a world record. It was bronze, the third place. These are used to explicitly tie the events together.
Linking IP nationalization to the crash.
Wow.
Oh.
And the source raises a critical question. Why would money that had supposedly been borrowed by the banks need to be laundered? Since its origin, a loan should be transparent.
Good point.
This leads to the strong implication that the funds must have come from some other source than borrowing, suggesting a clandestine, perhaps illicit origin for the capital flowing through the system. This narrative presents the alleged nationalization as a means to acquire vast sums of capital derived from the ingenuity, which were then laundered and purportedly used to buy up businesses and banks around the globe.
So the ingenuity becomes illicit, cash-fueling global expansion.
That's the picture painted. Intellectual property being converted into illicit wealth, which then fueled a global financial expansion that ultimately contributed to a historic collapse. And adding context to this, Iceland's removal from the Financial Action Task Force's FATF gray list in October 2020 related to combating money laundering and terrorism financing is also mentioned. It underscores the severity and the long-term implications of these financial allegations on a national scale.
And the consequences, as depicted in the sources, don't stop at finance. They seem to ripple right into the very core of the Icelandic political sphere. There are claims of widespread corruption and distorted truth.
Absolutely. The sources allege quite directly that representatives of some of the families who were involved in doing business with the ingenuity were made chairman of Icelandic political parties.
So political positions as rewards.
That's the suggestion. A direct political reward system for involvement in the alleged nationalization. Furthermore, there are serious claims of bribery and corrupt politicians who actively lie and distort the truth to serve their agenda. The text even quotes the U.S. economist Jeffrey D. Sachs saying, "We live in a web of lie," and alludes to a ministry of truth in the U.S., suggesting a systematic control and distortion of information at a high level.
A ministry of truth. Strong imagery.
Very pointed. It's a critique of transparency and integrity, implying that the political establishment became complicit in and benefited from these alleged illicit activities. The source even mentions an alarming personal detail. Upon the author's return to Iceland from the UK, a detective, previously unknown to the author, apparently attempted to befriend him. This implies a pervasive and ongoing surveillance links to these powerful entities.
That's chilling.
It paints a picture of a system so entrenched that it allegedly reaches into the personal lives of those it targets.
So what does this intricate web of allegations mean for the Icelandic tech landscape specifically? The sources highlight the delisting and acquisition of the Icelandic Software Fund back in 2003 as a really pivotal moment, directly connecting it to these broader claims of nationalization. This implies a deliberate move to consolidate control over local tech assets.
Right. The core information here is that Íslenski Hugbúnaðarjarðir in HF, which translates to the Icelandic Software Fund, stock symbol IHUG, will be delisted from ICEX main list on 30 June 2003. This happened after another company, Jarfesting of Fellage Stromer HF, acquired over 96% of its shares. The delisting was, according to the source, done in accordance with the company's board request, as it no longer fulfilled the listing requirements due to that acquisition.
Okay, a standard corporate procedure on the surface.
On the surface. But the source strongly implies this acquisition was directly tied to the alleged nationalization of Gisli's ingenuity. It states, then they know that Apple and Google, etc., will work on my ingenuity, also the social network feed and reader, etc. So this isn't presented as just a mere corporate takeover. Rather, it suggests that the fund's acquisition was a calculated maneuver, part of a larger, coordinated plan, perhaps, to gain control over significant technological assets and intellectual property, maybe for the ultimate benefit of those global tech giants.
And who are some of the key players involved in this acquisition and the subsequent corporate reshuffling, particularly those with connections across different sectors, finance, media, tech?
Well, the sources connect Ólafur Jóhann Ólafsson, an Icelander who was a prominent figure internationally. He served as chairman of the IACC, the International Anti-Counterfeiting Coalition, and also as an executive vice president at Time Warner.
Time Warner. Okay, big media.
Huge media. Time Warner included major entities like Turner Broadcasting, HBO, Warner Bros., producer of Looney Tunes. Remember that connection?
Right, the Tunes link again.
Exactly. Notably, Ólafsson and Stromer Boraris, another major investment entity, both joined the group of shareholders in Arvakur in November 2005. Now, Arvakur is the publishing company of Morgunblaðið, a major Icelandic newspaper.
Ah, so connecting finance, international roles, and local media control.
That's what's presented. Evidence of a coordinated effort to consolidate control not just over tech, but also over influential media outlets, suggesting a strategic move to potentially control the narrative around these events. The sources also name Kristinn Bjornsson. He's a former manager of Skildingur, which was Shell Iceland, and noted as a relative of former Prime Minister Geir Hallgrímsson. He's identified as a shareholder in Íslandsbanki Glitnir Bank, which itself sold Stromer Investment Bank. And Kristinn Bjornsson's wife, the source adds, was a former Minister of Justice and President of Parliament, showing deep political connections.
Okay, a tight network.
Very. Another figure, Sigurður Smári Gylfason, the former manager of the Icelandic Software Fund itself, is mentioned as opening a company called Barron's Capital in 2003 and later joining the management of Icebank. These intricate connections paint this vivid picture of a tightly knit network across finance, media, and technology, often with clear political ties, all seemingly linked in this narrative by the overarching claim of intellectual property acquisition. The phrase targeting software, copyright theft, the backbone of the expansion, is actually used repeatedly in the source material, underscoring the perceived motive behind all these actions. Now, if we connect this to the bigger picture, the sources suggest something quite extraordinary, that the construction of a major cultural landmark in Iceland, the Harpa Concert Hall, is intrinsically tied to these alleged nationalization efforts.
The concert hall.
Well, the core information is that the Harpa Concert Hall and Conference Center, along with a related memorial on Vijay Island, are described as being long awaited by the Icelandic music community and the nation. Standard stuff. However, the source makes a remarkably strong and direct claim. These cultural gifts were received, quote, in exchange for my ingenuity related to the music industry using the internet and my companies, without taking the discussion with me.
In exchange, so trade?
That's the blunt allegation, a quid pro quo. So you can say they could not give them the music house without the nationalization of my ingenuity related to the music industry and my companies. And the timing, again, is highlighted as crucial. Construction ideas for a music hall apparently began circulating around April 6, 2003, just days after that Apple store opened in Iceland.
Days after, suggesting a synchronized plan.
That's the strong implication. A plan involving both corporate assets, like Apple's entry, and major cultural assets, like Harpa. The insight here isn't just that a building was maybe traded, but that the source links national cultural investments directly to the alleged exploitation of private intellectual property. It suggests a highly controversial, ethically charged foundation for a very public landmark.
That's a truly profound accusation that a significant national landmark was essentially built on the back of someone else's uncompensated ingenuity in companies. And the sources point to specific personal connections to solidify this very contentious claim, people involved in both.
Yes, the narrative weaves in very specific personal connections that appear to tie the alleged nationalization directly to the Harper Project and the individual, Gisli. The source notes that the operations manager of the construction department of Reykjavik City at the time, a man named Agnar Gulagson, was then made managing director at Solheimar.
Solheimar, that's the community where Gisli was residing.
Exactly. The unique self-sustaining community or institution where Gisli was living at the time. Agnar Gulagson was also apparently involved with the Imagine Peace Tower on Vieti Island, further linking him to these prominent cultural projects. And adding another layer to this intricate network, the source states that this manager's wife, Kristjansdóttir, later worked for Landsnet HF.
Landsnet Fiber Optics.
Yes, the company involved in optical fiber infrastructure. It was later acquired by the Icelandic Treasury after being owned by Reykjavik Energy. This implies a direct link between city infrastructure management, major cultural projects, and individuals connected to the place where the individual at the center of these claims was living. It suggests a deliberate coordination of efforts, or at least a remarkable confluence of roles.
And within the music industry itself, who are the figures mentioned in relation to these events? Does it show how this alleged appropriation might have extended into the very fabric of Icelandic culture?
It does name specific Icelandic music publishers, like Steinar Berg and John Olafsson, described as prominent figures in the industry for decades. What's particularly insightful, or perhaps damning from the source's perspective, is how their sons, Skarphéðinn Berg Steinarsson and Sverrir Berg Steinarsson, became prominent figures in companies like Baugur Group.
Baugur, the retail and media conglomerate.
That's the one. And also Glitnir Bank, one of the banks that collapsed in 2008. And even, remarkably, in the Representative Council of Solheimar, where Gisli was located.
The council at Solheimar.
Yes. The source provocatively points out that Sverrir Berg Steinarsson is suddenly representative for Solheima, says, where they keep me. Meanwhile, they are stealing my assets' ingenuity. This implies a direct link between their ascent into powerful positions in finance and business and the alleged nationalization, suggesting they or their families benefited directly from the claimed appropriation. Furthermore, former Navision co-workers of Gisli, remember his background in business software development, are mentioned as having joined companies associated with these music publishers like Dagur Group HF and Ardegi HF, or moving into influential roles in education and media. It suggests a broad network connected even to his former professional life. The source even mentions a musician, Skuli Gautusson, who apparently came to Solheimar when Lazy Town was being prepared in the Solheimar Theater. He also apparently joined a musical family that a former Navision co-worker married into. It just further illustrates the intricate, interwoven nature of these alleged connections across multiple sectors: music, finance, tech, politics, even personal relationships.
This raises a really important question. How deeply involved was the media in this alleged process? The sources paint a vivid picture of significant media influence, maybe even systematic control over the narratives surrounding these events.
They absolutely do. The core information starts with a direct claim we touched on. CNN's iReport, the platform that enabled citizen journalism, is directly credited as Gisli's ingenuity. And CNN itself is noted as being, quote, very efficient with coverage of my ingenuity in 2 decades.
Efficient coverage.
Yeah.
Suggesting they benefited.
Well, it suggests the individual believes CNN benefited from and was perhaps aware of his innovations, maybe even using them as a vehicle for specific narratives, though that's interpretation.
And there's that Icelander mentioned again, Olafur Jóhann Olafsson, as a key figure in a major global media conglomerate, suggesting a very high-level connection.
Yes, Olafur Jóhann Olafsson is highlighted again. Remember, he was IACC chairman, the International Anti-Counterfeiting Coalition, and Time Warner executive vice president. Time Warner included Turner Broadcasting, HBO, Warner Bros. Producer of Looney Tunes, that name link again.
Right.
Critically, Olafsson later became a significant shareholder in Arvakur, the publishing company of Morgunblaðið, that major Icelandic newspaper, alongside Strámur Barras.
So the connection is direct. Powerful global media figure invests in influential local Icelandic media.
Exactly. It shows a potential pathway for consolidating control, not just over technological assets, but perhaps over information itself. The source even notes that one of the board members of Lazy Town Company, remember Pixel, has also been a director of Turner Broadcasting System Denmark APS. This further connects prominent entertainment figures, media entities, and that Pixel branding mentioned earlier. It suggests a coordinated effort, or at least overlapping interests, across various forms of media and intellectual property.
So with these high-level connections in place, what kind of allegations are made regarding media bias and actual control within Iceland itself, specifically concerning how this narrative might have been shaped or maybe even suppressed?
The allegations laid out are quite strong, quite pervasive. The sources explicitly state, to be honest, there are almost no Icelandic journalists who have not been on the payroll of these people or a contractor.
Almost no journalists. That's a sweeping statement.
It is. It suggests a systemic corruption, or at least co-option, of the media landscape. It alleges fake news and disinformation, and claims that powerful individuals worked systematically to get the reputation, health, and livelihood of journalists who might challenge the established narrative. The return of Davíð Oddsson, a former mayor of Reykjavik and the longest-serving prime minister of Iceland, as editor-in-chief of Morgunblaðið in September 2009, is highlighted as a significant event in this context.
A former PM becoming editor of a major paper.
Yes, suggesting a prominent political figure reasserting control over a major media outlet during a critical period. The source suggests deep control of information, linking it again to that concept of a ministry of truth and the chilling idea that when the state wants to control your thoughts. It implies a deliberate manipulation of public perception to perhaps suppress the truth about these alleged nationalizations and financial dealings.
And this pervasive network of influence, according to the source, seems to extend beyond just media and finance, reaching into the entertainment industry more broadly, pulling in famous names.
It does, creating an even wider web of alleged involvement and benefit. As we touched upon, the source directly mentions Lazy Town's character Pixel and connects it to Google Pixel, cementing this idea of intertwined influence across different creative and corporate domains. It also broadly claims that many of the most famous people in the world, politicians or in the entertainment industry, have taken part in my art, movies, or events.
Taking part in his art.
Yes, implying that a vast array of high-profile individuals have benefited from or been involved in the dissemination or use of his claimed ingenuity, whether they were aware of the origins or not. This suggests that the impact of this alleged nationalization is potentially far more widespread than just a single country's tech sector, possibly reaching into global entertainment and political circles. Now, if we connect this to the bigger picture again, the sources suggest this pervasive network of influence spans politics, business, and personal relationships, all intricately connected allegedly to the nationalization of Gisli's ingenuity. The core information here points back to that significant change in management at Solheimar in 2003. Remember, the unique community where Gisli was residing. It directly involved individuals connected to Reykjavik city government or related companies and various political parties, specifically the Independence Party, often abbreviated XD, and the Progressive Party, XB. This includes figures like Agnar Gullaugsson, who we mentioned was the head of the construction department for the city of Reykjavik, and then transitioned to a management role at Solheimar SAS. Other names like Guðmundur Bjarnason from the Progressive Party and Lara Margaret Ragnarsdóttir, Independence Party, both members of parliament at the time, are mentioned as being part of the representative council of Solheimar.
So direct, high-level links.
Yeah.
City administration, members of parliament, and the very institution where the individual at the center of these claims was living during these crucial times.
That's the connection being drawn, a direct high-level link.
So there's that claimed direct link between municipal administration, political figures, and the institution. What about more personal connections that allegedly weave into this complex web of influence, things that seem almost too coincidental?
Yes, the sources detail a really dense network of personal connections that appear to circle back to Gisli, suggesting an almost uncanny confluence of individuals and relationships. For instance, Agnar Gullaugssson's wife, Kristbjörg Kristjánsdóttir, became a Landsnet HF employee after moving from Solheimar. Landsnet, remember, involved in internet via optical fiber owned by Reykjavik Energy, later majority owned by the Treasury.
Right, the infrastructure link.
Implying a family connection directly into the nation's critical internet infrastructure. Another intriguing detail mentioned is that Agnar's and Krisbjørg's daughter apparently had a boyfriend who was in a Norwegian boy band called The Boys, and they were reportedly staying at Solheimar during this period.
A boy band. Okay.
Yeah, the narrative suggests an almost conspiratorial coincidence of people and places, hinting at maybe orchestrated proximity and influence,
Right.
or just highlighting the small, interconnected nature of Icelandic society.
That's incredibly specific. And the connections don't stop there, do they? Former colleagues of Giesli seem to pop up in remarkably significant roles as well.
Exactly. Former Navision coworkers of Giesli, from his professional background in business software development, are also noted to have moved into significant and influential roles elsewhere. For example, one former coworker, Katrine Anna Gudmundsdottir, is mentioned as having started a romantic relationship that led to marriage into one of Giesli's relatives' families. This family is described as a nationally known actors family from Freezy Island. The source notes this as happening of all the places in the world, emphasizing the perceived unlikeliness of such a connection without some design. Other former Navision coworkers are mentioned in roles such as marketing manager for the University of Iceland, working with elementary schools in Reykjavik, or involved with network security projects. This pattern, as presented, implies that individuals from Giesli's professional past became perhaps strategically placed within institutions across education, media, and technology, further solidifying the alleged network of control and influence that surrounded him during the period of alleged nationalization.
And finally, are there direct political party links mentioned, beyond just individuals being members? Does it suggest a more institutionalized involvement in this alleged scheme?
Yes, the source points out quite boldly that representatives of some of the families who were involved in doing business with the ingenuity were made chairmen of Icelandic political parties.
Chairman of parties, that's a major claim.
It's a very bold claim of direct political influence and potentially a system of reward for involvement in these alleged activities. It suggests that the benefits of the claimed nationalization extended directly into acquiring political power. Specific political party affiliations, as we've noted, are mentioned for various individuals throughout the sources, underscoring the deep integration of this network within the political fabric of Iceland, as portrayed here. Furthermore, the source cites a 2013 Facebook post, apparently by the Progressive Party itself, mentioning Facebook, Google, Marel, and Osser. Ideas that came true.
Ideas that came true.
The source interprets this as further evidence of this interconnectedness and the awareness at a political level of the technological innovations at the heart of these claims. It implies a shared, yet potentially uncredited, origin for these successful ventures. It suggests an open acknowledgement, perhaps, of the source of these ideas, albeit without proper attribution or compensation according to this narrative.
This has been a really deep dive into some truly complex and incredibly far-reaching claims. A narrative that attempts to fundamentally rewrite significant elements of modern tech history. But at the heart of it all, as the sources reveal, is a very personal story. It's told from a first-person perspective, with very direct, often emotional statements, indicating a deeply personal struggle.
Indeed. Yeah, the core information really reveals this deeply personal dimension through some striking statements like, Iceland isn't, I am. It immediately establishes this profound connection the author feels between himself, Giesli, and the very identity of the nation in the context of this whole narrative. The author mentions having been at Solheimar during those described management changes, the unique community we discussed, and having spent significant time abroad in Denmark and the UK. This provides a personal timeline and geographical context for his observations and experiences surrounding these events.
And alongside these personal experiences, there are very grave allegations of surveillance and harassment, implying an ongoing, pervasive struggle that extends far beyond just intellectual property disputes.
That's a critical and, frankly, alarming part of the personal dimension conveyed in these sources. The document includes grave personal allegations like, there's some kind of siege around me today, even in a foreign country, and has been for a long time now. I'm being stalked. I need a solution that works.
Being stalked, even abroad.
That's the claim. The author states that they are being monitored and that, quote, they have prepared my whereabouts or stofa in advance and monitored them. This suggests a systematic, preemptive effort to track their movements and activities wherever they might go. And that deeply disturbing detail about a detective attempting to befriend the author upon his return to Iceland from the UK is also stated. It reinforces this sense of being under constant pervasive surveillance and perhaps manipulation.
That's incredibly unsettling.
And is presented not as just a fleeting incident, but as a long-standing, profoundly impactful issue, suggesting a deliberate attempt to control or intimidate the individual at the center of these claims.
That paints a picture of incredible isolation and frustration, suggesting a profound personal cost to these alleged events. The source also explicitly touches upon deeply personal sacrifices made along the way.
It does, with a clear and quite poignant sense of personal cost. The author notes, "My togetherness with my children was sacrificed for the election offices." It's a powerful statement. It implies that their personal life, and indeed their fundamental family relationships, were negatively impacted or perhaps deliberately disrupted due to the political and financial machinations described in the sources. There's a palpable sense of frustration, injustice, and unresolved grievance running through it all. Regarding the alleged lack of fair compensation for his ingenuity in companies, with the money and businesses purportedly never reaching the right hands. This sense of profound, uncompensated contribution and the immense personal toll it has taken is a central emotional thread throughout the sources. It really underscores the human cost of these large-scale alleged appropriations. And this leads us right to the crucial "so what" question, doesn't it? The sources aren't just presenting a historical account, however contested. They're also a clear and urgent plea for recognition, for justice, a call for accountability for these alleged actions. The core information here is the author's direct, impassioned statement. "I really hope that these fine people can all give good explanations as to why these people are trading my ingenuity and acquiring property in my ingenuity that rightfully should have been mine."
A direct challenge for explanation.
Yes. And the overarching theme, the unresolved grievance that just permeates the entire narrative, is that they still owe me the money and those companies. It's a powerful demand for rightful ownership and restitution.
So it's a profound search for resolution, then, not merely a complaint about past events. Have there been attempts mentioned to get official bodies involved, maybe legal or law enforcement, to address these really grave claims?
Yes. The author indicates attempts were made to contact relevant institutions such as the police, etc., back when these events were unfolding. This shows a clear effort at the time to seek legal or official recourse to address what they perceived as theft and injustice.
But presumably without success.
Well, the implication is certainly that these attempts did not yield the desired results, leaving the claims unresolved and prompting, perhaps, the detailed account presented in these sources we're discussing. The source emphasizes that nationalization is the use of force, and fair compensation is the use of force, and often war with the nationalized. It highlights the perceived. Absolutely. The source explicitly encourages you to read the underlying documents, to understand the content, and to get the big picture. It reinforces the idea that this deep dive, while extensive, is just a glimpse into a much larger, incredibly complex situation. It's a clear invitation to engage directly with the primary material yourself, to grasp the full scope of these extraordinary claims and the intricate, interwoven web of connections presented within them. It really challenges you to confront a narrative that fundamentally re-examines the origins of our digital world.
We have certainly navigated a truly unique landscape today. From those audacious claims regarding the genesis of core digital innovations to the serious allegations of national-level nationalization, the deep financial implications, and this deeply personal quest for justice. The narrative presented in these sources really challenges conventional understandings of technological progress. It highlights the intricate, sometimes hidden connections between industry, finance, media, politics, and crucially, individual lives.
Indeed. This deep dive illuminates a perspective where the ownership and development of fundamental digital concepts are fiercely contested, framed against a backdrop of significant Icelandic political and economic shifts, including, remember, a historic banking collapse. The sources compel us to consider how intellectual property, when it gets intertwined with national interests and powerful corporate entities, can lead to highly complex, often opaque, and profoundly personally impactful situations. It forces us to rethink established histories.
What stands out to you most as you reflect on this particular deep dive? For me, it's a powerful reminder that beneath the glossy surfaces of global tech, there are often these deeply personal stories and really challenging questions about who truly owns the ideas that shape our digital world, and maybe more importantly, who benefits from them.
Absolutely, and that raises a critical question, I think, that extends far beyond Iceland. In an increasingly digital and interconnected world, how do we truly ensure that inventiveness is recognized, protected, and properly compensated? Especially when the lines between national interest, corporate power, and individual rights become so blurred, potentially leading to systemic appropriation, as alleged here.
A powerful thought to leave you all with, and one that certainly encourages further exploration long after this deep dive concludes. Thank you for joining us on this journey.